between Des Moines, Iowa and Council Bluffs, Iowa, heading westbound on that multi-ribbon string of asphalt that stretches from the George Washington Bridge in New York City all the way to San Francisco, that being Interstate 80. I'm on the interstate hurtling west across white, rolling, sort of an undulating landscape covered in snow in the middle of the WPL, that of course being white people land, more specifically in Iowa. And I'm on my way to Council Bluffs, which lives right on the border with Nebraska, adjacent to Omaha. These are places I've never been. I've never performed as a comedian, but nonetheless, I'm hurtling westward across this great American accomplishment called the Interstate Highway System to see that most curious of American candidates, a political phenomenon in his own right, coming from the most obscure of towns. I think it's the 60th size market in America, that being South Bend, Indiana, a son of the heartland, rather a homosexual son of the heartland, and that being, of course, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I'm going to see him in Council Bluffs, where he's having a rally on the western edge of Iowa. And I look out my window, I see farms and snow, and I took a wrong turn, mistakenly misreading my navigation app, and I had to exit to correct my direction, and where I exited was the birthplace of none other than John Wayne, our iconic movie star who emigrated, I guess, as a young boy from the heartland to Glendale, and then to USC football, and then into John Ford Westerns, and then into the hearts and minds and consciousness of all Americans. So fittingly, I went by John Wayne's birthplace. It was, well, I actually didn't see the birthplace or the crib or the manger. I'm sure it's all there. Instead, I just saw a sign and quickly rerouted myself to get back on Route 80, going west towards Council Bluffs, Iowa, to see Pete Buttigieg. This morning I had my first conversation here with a man who attended the Donald Trump rally. I didn't want to debate. I didn't feel like that was really appropriate. And anyway, there's no debating with the religiously convicted, but rather just to hear what the guy had to say, getting out of my little liberal bubble, and just hear what the guy had to say. And he was very heartfelt and convicted in his beliefs. And I was amazed when he started talking about my Congressman Adam Schiff. His lip quivered with hatred, and I almost regretted saying, well, you know, he's actually my congressman, because I didn't want to incite any violence. But in the end, it was nice. Oh, and here I am going past the Iowa Veterans Cemetery and the Bob Feller Museum. Who knew? I forgot. Another great sports icon from the heartland, Bob Feller, that right-hander who made his fame for the Cleveland Indians in the late 40s. And Feller had a fastball. He's probably the first of those famously fireballing right-handers, and he led the Cleveland Indians to a championship in 1948. And so here we are, another famous son of the heartland, Bob Feller, as I come over a crest, and I just see a gray expanse of whiteness and snow and brown trees with not even a hint of a leaf. In a few months, it'll all be green and verdant, but for now, it's cold, white, and forbidding as I hurtle west on Route 80. Has special meaning for me because I lived in New York City and began my career there at the eastern terminus of this highway, and I went to UC Berkeley at the western terminus in San Francisco. So I'm at somewhere in the mindless, murky middle of Route 80 going west to see Mayor Pete. So I'm here at the Mid-American Center in, well, where am I? I'm in none other than Council Bluffs, Iowa, on the border of Nebraska. A whole line of people here to see Mayor Pete, probably the most, well, I would say the biggest political phenomena of the whole campaign thus far. From out of really beyond obscurity, he's thrust himself into not only the conversation, but into the polls and into prominence. So here we are. Hello. How are you doing? Are you guys Pete supporters?
Yeah.
And what brought you here today? Are you from Council Bluffs? Where are you guys from?
From Omaha.
You're from Omaha. Okay, but you won't be in. When is Nebraska? When is their primary?
May.
May. So you got a little time.
A little time.
Yeah, and Nebraska's actually unique because it divides its electoral It's actually one of the only few states, I think, that divide it.
Alaska and Maine are the only two that do that. I live in Lincoln.
Hollywood. But I flew yesterday to Des Moines. You were just in Burbank? I missed you. Where were you? You didn't call me. You always do that. I hate that.
I had to go meet Tim Allen. I just had to go meet him.
You had to meet. Well, he told me he had to meet you. Now, it became Council Bluffs because what? Some Indians had a council here.
It was called Canesville, and then it became Council Bluffs, and they named that because of the Lewis and Clark expedition coming through here, and where they met the natives was up on the bluffs overlooking the valley, Council Bluffs.
Okay, and Lewis and Clark, that was before GPS and the whole thing. They didn't have Waze, and so they just went up the river. And what river is that right there?
The Missouri.
The Missouri, okay. And the headwaters of the Missouri, that's where the whole thing happened. How did Mayor Pete first get on your radar? Because to me, I mean, he's probably the biggest political phenomena of the whole thing, because the guy came from beyond obscurity. I mean, but for Notre Dame, I wouldn't even have heard of South Bend. And yet, he had the gall to think, yeah, I could be president. I'm not 40. I'm mayor of one of the smaller cities in the country. You know, after that, you become a town, and then after that, it's a village. And he thought he could be president. I often wondered, where did you get that idea? How did that get into your head that you thought you could be president? How did he get on your radar, and why is he interesting, and why are you here?
It was a little later down the line. I think it was end of October, early November, that I was like, I should probably check out and see who these Democrat candidates are for this year. And there were so many, of course. And so I looked into kind of each one individually, looked at their policies and different things, and kind of weighed what I liked, what I didn't like. And Pete, his message of unity and belonging just really, really struck with me, especially because just currently I feel like there's a lot of division in the country, and I really do believe that he's the one who could kind of bring us together.
Do you think actually America really needs to get together? I mean, maybe we don't really need to be together. I mean, it's been a factional country really since the inception. We had a civil war that proved that point, and yet now everybody wants to get together and have a campfire. Talk to me. How did Pete get your attention, and where are you going to caucus, and what happened?
I caucus at my local elementary school right up the street from me. I'm precinct captain for District 2 in Council Bluffs.
And how does it work?
You set up in your prospective corners for the candidate you support, and then you do your first alignment, and everybody goes to the candidate they support, and then during the second alignment, you can go to the other sides and try to coerce them to your side. And basically you want to speak to your experience and what you believe in the candidate you support, and just relay that message to other people, and hopefully they join your side. And
now when you do the coercion, I mean, maybe that... are you allowed to use any tools like ropes or hooks?
It'd be nice if you could, but no.
So you're supposed to use persuasion and ideas and your charm, which you have plenty of, right? So okay. So I didn't know the coercion is like certain people get wrangled, there's handcuffs, the whole thing. Not like that.
The wrong word, but
okay.
Yes.
I haven't seen him yet. He translates better in person or on television?
In person, definitely. His message is felt. It's heartwarming, and it can bring you to tears.
Well, keep it together, pal, okay?
I definitely will.
Okay, keep it together. I don't want you breaking down too much. Now, let me ask you this. To me, the overarching concern for everybody is which candidate can put on that rusted armor and grab that lance and really face and defeat the assassin-in-chief or the predator-in-chief. And what's your feeling?
Yes, I do believe that Pete Buttigieg is well articulated enough to get on the stage, the debate stage, with Donald Trump and put him in his place and not play partisan games and bow down to him or let him bully him around. And I speak for him every day to everybody I work with and all my friends and family. I work at a cattleman steel fabrication. I'm an iron worker.
Okay. All right, we're going to have a couple more people here. Are you Iowans?
I am.
You were an Iowan and you're for Pete?
He just feels right to me right now.
You felt him?
Yes.
You've actually had an encounter with him where you felt him?
I was just from the advertisements. He just seems like he's the one that I want to go for.
Okay.
He fits where my standards are.
What person from South Bend thinks they can run for president? I mean, how do you get that idea? That to me is like amazing. Like he's sitting on, mayor here. What's my next job? Well, there's assemblyman. You might think about a senator. In Indiana, you might think about maybe governor. No, forget that. I'm going to leap for, Yeah, we're just going right for the presidential. And, you know, there's people like that in our country. You know, there's a lot of candidates most of us never hear about. But the fact that I'm looking at this huge line here, and he's in the conversation, he's in the polls. I mean, to me, that's in and of itself like a spectacular political achievement. And I mean,
this is on the scale of John Kennedy.
Well, John Kennedy was a senator.
That's true. He had
and a congressman before that. Yeah.
But in terms of the youthful enthusiasm, the insight, the future outlook that they have, I think he ranks up there. Also with an Obama, just young men that have drive and that have a vision.
Do you think that this guy can defeat him where it matters in the Electoral College?
Right now, no. I don't think so. I don't think a young gay man, our country is ready for that, unfortunately. It just doesn't speak to the mores of our country right now, especially not in Iowa. Especially not in Iowa. Be interesting to see what Monday turns out in terms of his position in Iowa. But I'm hoping that he'd make a great vice presidential candidate. I'd love to see him on the ticket. I just don't think he can bring the coast and the center together.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, every 4 years, the eyes of the world focus on this little plot of not a lot of land called Iowa. And I don't necessarily think Iowans decide. I feel like it's more like the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, where the winnowing occurs. Yesterday night, I arrived in Des Moines from Los Angeles by way of Chicago, and the PVP had a big rally in downtown Des Moines. By that I mean Putin's vice president.
Where did you get that?
Hey man, that's what I do. I'm a merchant of mirth. I tell jokes. I'm a comedian. That's what I do. Okay. Here I'm a coastal elite. When I get back to the coast, I'm way at the bottom of the food chain. But right here, I'm from the land of law. I'm a podcast. I'm available to be ignored anywhere on earth, from Council Bluffs to Timbuktu. People can go, I don't want to listen to this guy. Forget about it. And I want to put my finger on the heartland, you know. If this is the heartland. Are we in the heartland?
We are definitely in the heartland.
This is the heart of the heartland.
This is the heart.
Yes. And what do you do, sir?
I'm retired from the railroad.
From the railroad?
Union Pacific Railroad.
Okay, so you're like the whole thing, back and forth, the Golden Spike.
Nebraska, the headquarters of the Union Pacific Railroad. I've been here 40 years.
Wow, so you're a railroad man. Former. You know, I always wanted to be on one of those things where, you know, you see in the silent movies where...
No, you wouldn't want to do that.
It just looks so fun, you know? You know what I noticed?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I bet. You know, it's good for the core. You got to work on your core, you know? When I was a kid, nobody had cores. We just had guts, and they hung over your belt, and nobody cared. You know, speaking of movies, I was driving into Council Bluffs, and I saw Harry Langdon Boulevard.
Yes. Do you know who Harry Langdon is?
Harry Langdon was a great silent star of the Hollywood era. He was actually somewhat underrated. He made a great movie called Long Pants. Yep. He was one of those great silent era comedians. And so driving here from Des Moines to Council Bluffs, I had three places where they were memorializing famous people. The first was John Wayne. Yep. The second was Bob Feller. He was a great pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, famous for one of those first, you know, incredible fastballs. And then Harry Langdon. And so what sentence could I get Harry Langdon, Bob Feller, and John Wayne together? It's impossible.
Truth is stranger than fiction, huh?
Right. So working in the railroad, was that unionized your whole life pretty much?
Of course. Very strong union, yeah. 85% of the workforce is union,
right.
15% management. So,
and were you on the union side or the management?
I was on both. But I retired on the management side.
But do you still get the retirement benefits of the union?
No, I don't get anything from the union. Unfortunately, I had to write away all my rights when I switched from the union to management. You relinquish all your union rights.
Thanks for chatting.
You said you had welcome to Iowa.
Well, thanks. And
until Monday night.
Well, I'll be here till Monday. I'm going to go back to Des Moines. I'm going to go over here. You know, the other billionaire, Tom Steyer, is going to be talking. And, you know, I think billionaires have gotten a bad rap because of the fake billionaire. And it's really cast aspersions on all those other nice billionaires. And it's not fair. We have to treat billionaires as individuals and peoples, too. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. And thank you for yours.
Nice talking to you.
All right. Tell me your name again.
Steve and Judy Smith.
Right before a little press gaggle with Mayor Pete will be coming out to talk to a bevy of cameras here in Council Bluffs, and I have a bird's eye and word's eye view.
That the Senate GOP is extremely unlikely to to hold this president accountable. And as I remind voters, the Senate may be the jury today, but we're the jury tomorrow. And this is our opportunity to make sure not only that there's accountability for this president, but a better way for this country going forward.
But is that now more important than any of the debates?
Well, the way I view it is that there's not a fork in the road between how to govern well and how to win big. It's why my message about the first day after Trump and what it's going to take to govern that is also about how we win. I think in order to win and in order to lead, we have to have a focus on the future. We've got to break with the politics of the past. And we will overthink it if we imagine that what is best to win is not the same thing as what is best to govern.
Mayor, a question on climate.
Say again?
What are your chances in Iowa?
Well, we feel very good and very strong about our chances in Iowa, partly because of what we're seeing with crowds, what we're seeing with caucus goers, also because of what I'm seeing in terms of our organization, the way that our organizers are being received, the pace of recruiting volunteers and precinct captains shows me that there's tremendous enthusiasm and just a top-flight organization here on the ground. But I've got to tell you, even now, I'm encountering a lot of folks who are still making up their minds, and that's what's going to make these next 3 days so critical.
Right here, Mayor, it's a climate question. Would you, as a candidate and as president, commit and pledge that to stop oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and would that be part of your climate plan?
It's clear that we need to move away from fossil fuels as a country, and therefore part of that is ending new fossil fuel exploration on federal lands. That is part of our vision on climate and part of also our vision on the importance of protecting our public lands. There is a multi-generational trust in publicly managed land, and when we're seeing some of the steps that are being taken, whether it's around fossil fuel exploration or other encroachments, it really raises questions about whether those lands will be there for generations to come.
Would you support legislation, sir? Would you support legislation that would stop drilling and development in the Arctic?
Again, my policy will be to stop any of this kind of development on federal lands.
Mayor, what do you
I think right now voters are looking at their caucus goers and looking at their specific choices. It's no longer just each of us telling our own story, but also explaining why on the questions that matter most, especially how we're going to win and govern well, why this campaign would be better than the alternatives. And what Vice President Biden and what Senator Sanders are offering is just a different approach and a different vision than mine. I want to make sure in this respectful but meaningful difference of approach that I'm laying out exactly why our approach is better.
Mayor, I've also talked a lot about campaign finance reform. Should there be a limit on how much candidates can self-fund their own campaign?
I think that has to be on the table in campaign finance reform, because what we're seeing right now is this suggestion that someone can literally buy their way into competition. And at a time when we're so concerned about the ways in which policy decisions are not happening with the majority of Americans in mind, we've got to make sure that's reflected in our politics, and that's part of the policy design issue we've got to take up when we end sanctions.
And it's extraordinary for me to reflect on the year that has brought us to this point, because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago that I was first turning up in coffee shops and backyards in Iowa, mostly just trying to get people to figure out how to say my name. I've learned that first name Mayor, last name Pete is probably the choice for a lot of folks. And the great news about the caucus is it's multiple choice. You don't have to spell or pronounce anything. But bonus points to those who have learned how to pronounce Buttigieg along the way. And by the summer, I knew we were getting somewhere, because folks would start to come to the event, and afterwards they'd say, you know, that sounded really good. I love your ideas. You're now in my top 7. In that Iowa way, we would tell me that. But now we are at decision time. And so I'm not only here to thank those who are already supporting this campaign, but to make my case one more time to those who are still deciding. And I admire how seriously Iowans take that thumb on the scale that you've got, that responsibility and influence that you have by being the first in the nation right here in your community. And I hear more and more about the imperative of making sure we get this right, because this is our one shot. We're watching the news out of Washington. It is extremely unlikely that the Senate GOP is going to hold this president accountable. But the good news is, if they are the jury today, we are the jury tomorrow, and this is our chance to stand against it. Our government is very well. And I admire how seriously Iowans take that thumb on the scale that you've got, that responsibility and influence that you have by being the first in the nation right here in your community. And I hear more and more about the imperative of making sure we get this right, because this is our one shot. We're watching the news out of Washington. It is extremely unlikely that the Senate GOP is going to hold this president accountable. But the good news is, if they are the jury today, we are the jury tomorrow, and this is our chance to stand against it. Our government is very well. So let me start off by asking you to form in your own mind the image that is the guiding image for this whole campaign for me. And it's how it's going to feel. The first time, I want you to picture it as specifically as you can, that first time that the sun will come up over Council Bluffs, and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Feels good, right? Isn't it a relief just to know that that day is going to come one way or the other? Isn't it nice to think that we can put the chaos behind us one day? Yeah. Put the meanness behind us? Put the tweets behind us one day? I think we're all ready for that. And so much depends on making sure we bring that day about. And the number one question I'm hearing now from caucus goers making up their minds is, how do we make sure we're going to win? And I'm here to make the case for you that you don't have to choose between the best way to win and the best way to govern. That actually the only way to win is the best way to govern, and it's to focus on the future. It's to understand what it'll be like on that day and what America is going to need. Because on that day, we're going to be facing challenges, the likes of which were not known or understood in this country just a few years or decades ago. Think about it. The sun will be coming up in a climate where we are this close to the point of no return, where in our communities, right here in the middle of the country, once-in-a-century floods are becoming an annual occurrence. That's happening right now and it's picking up steam. Sun will be coming up over an economy being profoundly changed by technology, by gig employment, by shifts that we could not have even pictured just a few years ago. And while the president's telling us everything's great because the Dow Jones is looking good, I think more and more of us are wondering whether that economy is going to serve us well. That sun will be coming up over schools where kids are learning active shooter drills before they are old enough to know how to read. And on that day, we will be facing security challenges on top of conventional issues and anti-terrorism, dealing with things like global health security, if you're watching the news out of China, climate security, cyber security issues that are mounting as we speak. These issues will be new in kind. The new president will have to confront them and do it in an atmosphere of almost unprecedented partisan division and dysfunction in Washington, D.C. That's what we're going to have to confront in order to govern well. In order to turn the page on that, it's going to take a focus on the future that I would argue is the exact same thing it's going to take in order to defeat Donald Trump. Because he, too, represents a challenge, the likes of which we've not quite seen in our politics. Now think about this. Every time my party has won the White House, every time we've succeeded, it's been with a candidate who has been focused on the future. Just think through the last half century, how we win. It's somebody who is opening the door to a new generation of leadership and moving past the political fights from before. So if we're thinking about how to make sure we win, if we're thinking about what risks we want to take, this is a good moment to remember that we win when we look to the future. Think about it this way. I know that the competitors in this race, of course, all view this differently. The vice president will say that we cannot take a risk on someone new. But if you think about that lesson from experience, I would argue that what history has taught us is at a moment like this, we cannot take the risk of trying to fall back on the old playbook and rely on the familiar to deal with a fundamentally new challenge in this life. Now, another approach that's being offered to you comes from Senator Sanders, speaking to goals that I think everybody shares, but presenting it in a political form that says that you've either got to choose between a revolution or status quo, and there's nothing in between. Coming at the very moment when we actually have a historic American majority that agrees not just on what we're against, not just a majority ready to move on from this president, but on what we're for. Just so long as we include everybody in that vision. A majority that is ready for a game-changing transformation to our healthcare system, the biggest expansion of coverage since Medicare was invented. Just not so sure about the idea of kicking people off their private plans. A majority that will embrace the idea of the biggest expansion in college affordability our country has seen since the GI Bill. Just not wild about the idea of working families subsidizing the children of millionaires and billionaires. We actually have an opportunity to energize, not polarize, that majority. Not only to win the election, but in order to govern what will be a dangerously divided nation. And so this has to be an effort that makes room for Democrats, for sure, for independents who are done with this president, and for those of what I like to call future former Republicans who still believe in the idea of limiting executive power. We got to make room for everybody. So my point is, if we want to win, we got to leave the politics of the past in the past. I care deeply about the decisions that led to the Iraq War, but right now I'm mainly focused on how to make sure we're not dealing with an Iran war by the time I take office. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about protecting Social Security, but I'm much less interested in who said what in the 1990s on the issue than I am in dealing with the fact that Social Security needs to be defended from a president who is seeking to cut that and Medicaid today. We have got to act now, and we've got to leave the politics of the past in the past and exchange it for a politics defined by boldness, by belonging, and by action. That is what I'm offering you, and that's my action for you. The good news is, I see so many Americans ready to make this happen, ready to form that majority, even a greater majority than President Obama had to work with 10 years ago to get these things done. Ready to make sure that we boost wages and empower workers, including standing with organized labor in this country to ensure the economy actually works for us. Ready to act on climate change before it swamps our communities, our economy, and our country. Ready to enact common sense gun law compatible with the Constitution that will save thousands of Americans' lives every year, from red flag laws to background checks, to see to it that the kind of weaponry I trained on to go to war has no business being sold anywhere near an American school for profit.
Pete's breaking it down.
There's an American majority ready to take steps now to make this into a country where your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth, your life expectancy, or your relationship with law enforcement. Ready to insist that no matter your religion, this country belongs to people of every religion and no religion equally, but people of faith could be paying as much attention to the Poor People's Campaign as to the 700 Club, because God does not belong to a political party in the United States. Most Americans can see that clearly. Most Americans from every political stripe support their kids, their schools, and their teachers, and are ready for a Secretary of Education who believes in public education and will build up our schools. We are united on that already. All we've got to do is galvanize, energize, and empower that body of Americans ready to make something happen. And so when I ask for your support, when I'm asking you to caucus for me, it's not that I ran for this office out of some desire to occupy it. It's in the name of a vision of what the office is for. I'm here to make the case that the presidency has a purpose. That the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president, it's the unification and the empowerment of the American people. If there's one thing that I have seen across my travels in this campaign in the last year, is that among us, including among Iowans, are the faces not just of the challenge, but of the solution. I saw it in a chance encounter with someone I had served with, hadn't seen since we were both in Afghanistan, ran into her by chance at the airport. And I hadn't seen her since she was injured in an insider attack while we were both out there. I saw her walking down the airport concourse with her teenage son, wearing a t-shirt that said, it was from the Wounded Warrior Project, and it said, "Some assembly required," on the front of the t-shirt. I asked her how she was doing. She lifted up her knee, tapped on her leg, her prosthetic leg, and said that the Navy had fixed her up just fine, and she was looking forward to an upcoming deployment. That's what's at stake. People are willing to do whatever is required of them by the United States of America when they are in uniform. That is why they and their families deserve a commander-in-chief who will never ask them to go into harm's way if there's not a good reason, and will take care of them during and after their time of service. The face of our economic challenge among people like a guy who came to one of our events, lifelong Republican, said he's driving for DoorDash now because everyone, he said, needs a side job these days. Think about that. If everybody needs a side job these days, that makes it sound like we are living through a time of national hardship, not a season of American plenty. That's why something is upside down in an economy where Amazon and Chevron can pay precisely zero in federal income taxes. And someone like that's got to take on multiple jobs. We can do better. And Americans can see that right now. I see the face of solutions everywhere I go. Often from people barely old enough or not yet old enough to vote. And often in areas that are thought of as conservative, but where we have the same interests and the same needs. I'm seeing out of the corner of my eye, Andrew, good example. And he's a precinct captain now, which is awesome. First time we met was in Shenandoah. The day couldn't have been more different than this one. It was probably 100 degrees outside and 110 inside the barn where we were gathered. And he stuck up his hand and asked about the question of how rural families and agricultural communities could be the tip of the spear in dealing with climate change. Which is exactly right, because we need farming to be at the forefront of getting this done, and we shouldn't just be calling for it, we should be paying for it with federal policy to support our farmers. I saw the face of the solution with someone else who has since become a super volunteer on this campaign, who I met just a couple of weeks ago in Emmitsburg. She raised her hand at a town hall meeting to ask about immigration policy. Because, she said, she remembers the pain her family went through a couple years ago when her father left the family. And she knows exactly what the words family separation meant to her family. And she has the moral imagination to put herself in the shoes of someone totally different. Maybe a 6-year-old boy from Honduras caught up in this president's policies, somewhere on the border in Texas, 1,000 miles away from where she lives. And she can see why it is so important that we have an immigration policy that actually matches our values as well as our laws. If she can see it, why can't Washington? Now, Washington look a little more like our rest of the communities and towns and families before it starts going